Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Sunday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy. Up first, we've got, let's see, that was yesterday. I hope you turned your clocks back this morning. Otherwise, up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, winter weather advisory for winds of 30 to gusts 45 miles an hour with some areas of blowing, drifting snow, reducing visibilities there. Those conditions will continue until midnight tonight, and either that's when it's forecast to end, or they'll kick it out longer. And moving on to satellite imagery, you can see the kind of a system here that brought the gusty winds, tighten the gradient up enough between the low center that's off to the north and then the high building over the interior to return those winds again. Gusts 40-45 miles an hour eastern Beaufort Sea coast today. Lighter back to the west, along with just flurries in through here, and a little steadier snow on the east side there. South of the mountains, though, the Brooks Range, pretty good conditions. Skies clearing out, drying out, and temperatures cooling off. In fact, many areas over the interior, central interior, south of the Brooks Range, north of the Alaska Range will fall below zero tonight, possibly as low as 15 below in Fort Yukon there in the upper Yukon Valley. Otherwise, mild conditions here south of the Alaska Range due to this continuous northward push of warm air, but then it takes off to the east here right as it gets up toward the coastline, but still some pretty good rains, Kodiak Island up into Bristol Bay, and even some light rain into the southern Kenai Peninsula today, with Homer picking about 1/10 of an inch. Otherwise, most of this missing the North Gulf Coast, or if not all of it, and sliding into the Panhandle today. About 8/10 of an inch of precipitation fell during the day today at Petersburg. Nearly 9/10 fell at Kodiak, and even in Bristol Bay, their Pilot Point on the other side of the Aleutian Range had about 1/2 an inch of precipitation with that. So a fair amount of moisture here, but again, it's all moving mostly to the east, trying to push northward here a little bit. We're in the cloud shield up into the Susitna Valley, and mostly clear, though. Northeast winds pushing the clear skies out off the southeast coast. Macoriac was pretty clear today with, northeast winds about 20 knots with 31 degrees. They're recorded 3 p.m. temperature. On the chart, you can see the clearing right through here up into the deltas, and actually all along the upper Yukon River there, or along the Yukon River up the valley. Pretty clear skies with high pressure building in. As the pressure difference between that low off the Arctic coast and this high that kicked those winds up today and throw the light snow in, reduce visibilities. Otherwise, rain over the southern southeast coast with Klawock picking up 8/10 of an inch of precipitation and becoming more showery up here to the north, but cloudy skies covering the whole area there. And then this area of rain associated with a warm front south to north flow here. Again, heaviest there right along the east side of Kodiak Island, and a few flurries over the northwest coast. Out west here, high pressure dominating the Bering Sea and the Aleutians with mostly cloudy skies, but areas of clearing, especially down here over the Aleutians. And for tonight, that pattern won't change much at all out there. See a little breezy condition, north to northeast winds or north winds, maybe gusts of 35 miles an hour, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula. Rain continues here, Kodiak Island with that warm front kind of stationary, and tries to work a little farther north up the Kenai Peninsula tonight, and then Cook Inlet. Don't think it'll reach Anchorage, probably get into Passage Canal, Prince William Sound. Right along the North Gulf Coast, look for increasing chances of rain, and it stays rainy periods of there for the southeast coast, although a little more showery, tapering off down here to the south and closer to that area. High pressure now shifting over the upper Yukon Valley. Lows tonight dropping anywhere from 5 to 15, 16, 17 below zero in the interior tonight. Different story here south of the Alaska Range, much milder, lows staying above freezing in many areas. And for Monday, we've got Clear skies, chilly temperatures or cool temperatures here for much of the interior. It should be mostly clear into northern Cook Inlet tomorrow. We're going to be right on the edge here, cutting across the Kenai Peninsula. Chance of rain, southern Cook Inlet, Homer, Seldovia, again Kamishak Bay, Iliamna, over to King Salmon, even as far west as Cape Newenham. Otherwise, the northern Bering Sea looking really good. Good VFR flying with that offshore flow here in the dry air from St. Lawrence Island out to the Pribilofs, and not too bad over the central Aleutians. Light winds with partly sunny skies. High pressure holding this system back, at least the precipitation and most of the wind. And now just a few flurries, far eastern Arctic coast, maybe the west side. That's about it. We'll see on Tuesday. Another weak trough drops into the area up there, with another low passing by a little farther to the north. This one weaker, probably will kick the winds up once again with that gradient tightening up, but maybe only 25 to 30 mile an hour for the wind gusts on Tuesday afternoon. On the east side, just a few flurries of the west with light winds. High pressure keeps the northern Bering Sea dry. Actually extends ridges all the way down to Adak and Atka. This front does make some headway into the far western Aleutians. And rain continues Kodiak Island up. You can see more moisture farther to the north here in the southwest interior, clear and cool over the central interior Copper River Basin. Rain, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and still kind of rainy, but drying out over the northern panhandle with increasing northerly winds. Lows tonight there, 30s to upper 30s to mid 40s for the panhandle, and lower to mid 30s here for southern Alaska, maybe upper 20s in the Susitna Valley. North of the mountains, though, lows falling below zero here over much of the area, and then back into the teens along the Arctic coast, 30s out west. Highs the following day, staying below zero tomorrow, upper Yukon Valley to Arctic Village, 35 to 40 here, south central Alaska, 50 to 55 for the Panhandle, near 50 in some areas of for the Alaska Peninsula. And then lows Tuesday morning, 5 to 15 below in the central interior, near freezing south central Alaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to a flying weather graphic for tomorrow morning. A lot of marginal VFR here over much of the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and then VFR here from St. Paul, St. George into the southwest coast and into the interior. Lingering marginal VFR over here along the eastern border, maybe the Copper River Basin, and also some here from the Gulf of Alaska up into the Kenai Peninsula and at least southern Cook Inlet, Bristol Bay, IFR along the Alaska Peninsula, covering Kodiak Island, extending eastward along that moisture boundary, right in now to the southern panhandle with marginal VFR up to the north, which will hold through the afternoon. Marginal VFR, northern panhandle, IFR down south, IFR Kodiak down along the Alaska Peninsula, marginal Bristol Bay, marginal VFR, southern Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, southern Kenai Peninsula, VFR over the interior. Areas of marginal VFR, mainly the western Arctic coast. Areas up through the Bering Strait, down into mostly covering the Bering Sea and the Aleutians. Outlook for Tuesday, a little bit better in the morning here. You can see the VFR zone all the way down to Atka, marginal to the west, some marginal to the east, IFR here. Just barely getting to Cape Newenham, marginal VFR, Togiak Bay, Dillingham, up into maybe the southern Kuskokwim Valley. IFR, east side of Kodiak Island, Fognak Island, marginal VFR, again, up into at least southern Cook Inlet, eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, Prince William Sound, and over the Gulf into the Panhandle with IFR down south. For the afternoon, IFR down there vanishes, marginal VFR here. The southern three quarters of the Panhandle, IFR along the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, also the east side of the Aleutian Range, and VFR holds over the interior, marginal VFR, North Slope Arctic Coast, VFR Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, Kotzebue Sound, right on down to St. Lawrence Island, back into the marginal VFR for the Pribilofs with IFR just to your east, down along the eastern Aleutians and south side of the Alaska Peninsula. Passes both Anatuvik and Adigan tomorrow, good VFR, and for Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR as well. Marginal VFR, I think, will stay south of Lake Clark Pass there, but it won't be too far to the south. And for Rainy, good VFR, windy VFR. And for Isabel, VFR also, but Mentasta, lingering moisture holding at marginal at least partway through the morning. We're trending to VFR throughout the day, midday into the afternoon. And for Tanita, VFR. Portage, VFR, with marginal VFR, probably likely on the eastern entrance at some point in the day tomorrow, if not all day. And for Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Looking at the freezing levels here, quite a gradient. The colder air kind of sliding off to the east-southeast here, and then the warmer air coming up from the south, getting turned to the east, so that kind of packs the isotherms up here. 2,000 feet southern Alaska, 10,000 feet almost to Kodiak Island, in across Dixon Entrance there with the gradient Gulf of Alaska right into the Panhandle, and down across the eastern Aleutians, chillier air out here over the Bering Sea, 2,000 feet south of Adak and Atka. And as far as icing goes, with that moisture coming up from the south here, could be some areas of considerable moderate rime icing, possibly here over Bristol Bay around the Aleutian Range, generally isolated moderate along that band as it slides eastward across the Gulf, just catching the southern or the North Gulf Coast into the northern Panhandle, or actually all of the southeast coast. And from there, taking a look at the jet stream, see this deep trough bringing the chillier air into the central Aleutians here, but it's dropped way down to the south, so flow coming around 150 knots out of the Asian continent there, kind of up and over this ridge axis, way down to the south, and then back south to north, ridging into southern Alaska, actually all the way up into Russia there. And Arctic jet here, the cold air now pulling off to the east-southeast, 130 knots for the two combined out of the northwest. That's now just east of the Panhandle. And at 9,000 feet, westerlies 25 to 30 in across the southeast coast, 15 North Gulf Coast, 25 Kodiak. Pretty light here over the interior, 10 to possibly as high as 20 knots. And that's about it. Even lighter out over the Bering Sea under this ridge axis here. And then north-northeast, 25 knots over the central eastern Aleutians. And then winds starting to come up late over the western Aleutians, turbulence, occasional moderate chop over the central Aleutian areas.
You guys got everything tied down back there? Yeah. Yep. We're going through the lee of St. Elias, so there might be some turbulence.
Fasten seatbelt sign on.
Well, who am I to tell you what to do?
There are tens of thousands of glaciers in Alaska. Some stunning cliffhangers, others wide glaciers that come down to meet the ocean tides. Some, like this one we flew over in August, are easily visible from low Earth orbit and are mesmerizing from 1,000 feet above, and have trees growing on top of their soil-laden boundaries. Those glaciers, although they represent only a fraction of the world's ice, are contributing much more than their share to sea level rise. Chris Larson and his colleagues have repeatedly measured 220 of them in a small single-engine otter, measuring their height with lasers and their depth with radar, and watching them change from season to season and year to year. But Alaskan glaciers are also different. We're only just figuring out how they all behave. Data from flights like these, part of NASA's Operation Icebridge, can help fill the gaps. Chris and radar specialist Martine Trufer are both from the University of Alaska Fairbanks and both seasoned Alaskan pilots. But they rely on their good friend and legendary bush pilot Paul Kloss and his 35,000 hours in the cockpit to fly the incredibly demanding flight lines the mission requires.
And does it help you guys being pilots too?
I would like to think so, but watching Paul
fly and seeing what he does, it's kind of like trying to learn quantum mechanics in kindergarten.
You know, I can fly my airplane around, but just seeing what Paul does in this extremely challenging environment in the mountains while trying to follow a specific flight line at a specific altitude above ground, negotiating winds, topography, maybe occasional low-level clouds that you have to get around, and just managing all that is just several levels above what I could do as a pilot.
Well, I think the first time I came here to this park, I was probably 4 years old with my father. I've been blessed to be able to fly in lots of places in the world, all over the place actually, almost every continent. I guess I'm always looking for some place that might be better than this, but I haven't found it.
Paul's plane is about 60 years old and is the first single-engine Otter ever retrofitted with a 1,000 horsepower engine, which makes takeoffs feel effortless and gives Paul the ability to negotiate wild terrain, which he certainly did during the first 2 incredible science flights of this campaign. And with sunny skies and relatively calm air, we covered 3 vastly different pieces of ice. While Paul fueled up the plane, Chris gave us a preview of the day's science and scenery.
So it has one of the greatest coastal reliefs anywhere in the world. So it's between the ocean and the summit of Mount St. Elias, which is 18,008 feet high. It's less than 10 miles. There's a stupendous amount of mountain right off the ocean. It's hard to beat it anywhere in the world. It might be the prettiest for me. It's absolutely stunning. From here in McCarthy, we'll cross one of the bigger precipitation gradients in Alaska too. Here it's about 10 inches of precipitation a year, and we'll go over to an area where it's on the order of 200 inches per year. So it's from one of the driest parts of Alaska to one of the wettest parts of Alaska in about 45 minutes flight time.
Wow, that's pretty good.
That's awesome. You want to do Tyndall next?
Sure, where you want?
If the winds are calm now, might as well grab it.
First, we came to the rugged landscape of Icy Bay, which not that long ago wasn't a bay at all. It was filled with ice. Tidewater glaciers in this region can make dramatic advances and retreats as they feed on high rates of snowfall and then retreat as they're melted by warm ocean waters. Like the Tyndall Glacier seen here, most of these glaciers have retreated dramatically over the last 100 years. But nearby Yahtzee Glacier, after years of retreat, is currently the most rapidly advancing glacier in Alaska. Overall, though, the Icebridge Alaska surveys, from the Denali region in the north to the Juneau ice field in the southeast, have documented pretty substantial thinning of glacial ice. Areas seen here in orange and red show between about 10 and 15 feet of thinning per year.
1200.
It's a nice waterfall up there from the hanging ice.
When we very first started profiling this, Paul, this gravel fan in the one in the valley next to it didn't exist.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
this was
look at all the good landing spots here.
Yeah,
There's no place to land here before.
no, it was deep water.
After covering several of Icy Bay's glaciers, given that it was time for lunch, just like that, we landed in this unforgettable spot. Flying eastward, leaving Icy Bay behind, we came to the mighty Malaspina, one of the Earth's great examples of a Piedmont glacier that spills out like pancake batter onto a broad plain as it approaches the sea. It surges at uneven intervals, creating dramatic patterns on its surface as it distorts the moraines of rock and soil borne along by the glacier. The Malaspina is less dynamic than the Yahtzee and is only melting at about the average rate for Alaska, but that could change quickly.
It has the potential for being one of the bigger geographic evolutions in Alaska. Certainly My son will be able to witness some big geography changes there. There's potential for it being connected with the ocean through some narrow lagoons, estuaries, which would take a little bit of coastal erosion, but it's not too hard to imagine that where the Malaspina Glacier is now could become a large bay.
The data that Martine's radar provides could reveal how vulnerable the Malaspina is to melting by the nearby ocean. Here we see the radar returns from the surface of the glacier, and here is something that Chris's lasers can't see, the rocky bed of the glacier, giving us both clues as to what's happening under the ice, as well as a measurement of its thickness. Finally, we came to the Yakutat ice field, 300 square miles of absolutely doomed ice perched high in the mountains. Researchers even debate how this ice field came to be at all, since in its current configuration, it's hard to imagine how it could capture enough snow to form glacial ice. And so, even if the Arctic weren't warming faster than the rest of the planet, this area would be likely to melt within a century or two. But with many other glaciers, it's easier to see the connection between a warming planet and ice loss. Thanks to data from IceBridge and other surveys, we now have a good estimate of the current rate of loss from Alaskan glaciers, 75 gigatons a year. While airborne observations over Alaskan glaciers have provided a rich record of change in the area, those efforts are now augmented by NASA's newest ice measuring tool, ICESat-2. With 6 laser beams of its own, and orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes, the satellite will carry on the record of Alaskan change. For their part, Chris and his team will continue to do their surveys for at least the next 2 years, helping to validate the ICESat-2 data and make further detailed observations over the stunning glaciers of Alaska.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecasts here for the southeast coast and the outer coastline. Pretty uniform. West winds 20 knots, seas 8 feet. North coast, though, east 25 knots with 9-foot seas. Lynn Canal, look for north winds 20 knots, seas at about 4 feet. And here, Passage Canal, north at 15 with 3-foot seas. And then for Clarence Strait, so I'm going around to the south at 15 with 3-foot seas. Moving ahead to Tuesday, we'll see a pretty good increase in the winds up here over the northern panhandle from Lynn Canal. North, 30 knots sustained with gusts of 45 knots. There's that pressure gradient tightens with high pressure building in the Yukon. Stevens Pass is 0 north, only coming up about 20 knots with 4-foot seas and pretty light northerly winds for Clarence Strait. South coast, we've got south to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots, seas as high as 9 feet, and then small craft advisories, east winds 25 knots on the north coast with 11-foot seas. Prince William Sound, light north breezes tomorrow with seas at 2 feet. Small craft advisories there for the marine zone, Middleton Island. Eastern North Gulf Coast, east 25 knots and northeast 30 knots for the western North Gulf Coast. Barren Islands, east at 30 and Kamishak Bay, northeast 30 with seas at 10 feet. And small craft advisories for Southern Cook Inlet for northeast winds at 25 knots and north of the Forelands, north winds at 20. And for Tuesday here, small craft advisories for all of Cook Inlet with northeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Gale warnings Kamishak Bay with seas building to 13 feet. And then Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast, 30-knot winds out of the east, seas 10 feet. And 25-knot winds for the eastern North Gulf Coast with Prince William Sound forecast to have a northeast wind at 20 knots with 3-foot seas. Kodiak Island, east side here, pretty light, south at 15, but northeast 30 with 10-foot seas in Shelikof Strait. Sitkinak to Castle Cape, southeast at 20. Alaska Peninsula, northeast 25 knots, seas 10 feet, and 30-knot northeast winds for Bristol Bay. Those will turn east, hold at 30 knots over Bristol Bay, seas at about 6 feet. East-northeast 25 for the Alaska Peninsula, seas 8 to 11 feet. And then 30-knot winds here from Castle Cape to Sitkinak and up through Shelikof Strait, 30-knot northeast winds there with east 25 on the east side of Kodiak. And for the Fox Islands tomorrow, north winds 30 knots, seas 10 to 12 feet, north 25 knots. Small craft advisories for Adak and Attica, especially Atka, dropping off probably only 20 knots for ADAC, and then northeast 15, but southeast increasing to 30 knots late tomorrow afternoon for Shimmy and Attu. Those will increase further, tightening gradient out there, southeast 45, southeast 30 here from Kiska to about ADAC, and then northeast 20 for the central Aleutian areas there, Atka Island. And the Fox Islands hold on to small craft advisories, northerlies 25 to 30 knots. For the southwest coast, small craft advisories, northeast winds 25 knots. St. Matthew Island, northeast 25. Pribilofs, north 25, and northeast 15 for Norton Sound, kicks up to about 20 knots for St. Lawrence Island. And for Tuesday, small craft advisories now, northeast 25 for Norton Sound and St. Lawrence Island. Also northeast 25, St. Matthew Island, north 25 for the Pribilofs, and the southwest coast, northeast 25 to 30. And for the western Arctic coast here, actually central and west side all the way down to Cape Thompson, southwest 25 knots with 5-foot seas. And for the southeast Chukchi Sea, southeast of 15. And the east side here, winds diminishing to 15 knots there over toward demarcation point. And then for Tuesday, another system goes by, bring it back up to 30 knots out of the west there, seas 6 to 7 feet, small craft advisories even for the central coast, northwest 25, lighter northwest 15 on the west side, and then kind of variable here from Wales up to Cape Beaufort, 10 to 15 knots. And for tonight again, winter weather advisory for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast ends tonight. Otherwise colder, a lot of areas dropping below zero here in the interior, anywhere from 15 to, or anywhere from 5, or call it 0 to 20 below coldest central and northeast interior, but pretty chilly all the way out to the southwest coast and clear all the way to the Pribilofs. Stays rainy here, North Gulf Coast, Kodiak Island, into the Panhandle. And then for tomorrow, clear and chilly over the interior, less snow, less wind on the Arctic coast, stays wet here right along the North Gulf Coast, and that area is going to, so we'll see, push northward here the next day and get moisture all the way up into the mid-Yukon River Valley and Yukon Delta.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.